C.2 Lesson 9 feels like a refreshing collective exhale for both me and my students. I'm Daniel in DC, and as a fellow OpenSciEd classroom teacher, I'm happy to walk you through how I approach this point of the unit, where we have spent weeks gathering clues like detectives, but now we are finally able to stop collecting clues and start assembling during this 2-day problemizing and putting pieces together moment. Before diving into new student work, let's anchor back to our established storyline. One thing I've noticed is how much it helps students to explicitly look back at the green balloon and soda can from Lesson 8. We recently figured out that atoms can become temporarily polarized when their electrons shift. That micro-scale logic explained why charged objects attract new ones. Now, the class starts wondering how to scale that mechanism way up to explain exactly what causes the macroscopic lightning to strike at a particular place and time. So let's take a look at the logistics for these 2 days. And when I teach this lesson, I try to map out about 30 minutes to a prep time the night before. There aren't any messy hands-on investigations, so you won't be mopping up water or taping things down for this lesson. However, the class will need student devices to view our assessment video and to complete an electronic community agreement survey at the end. When we look over the lesson map, it helps to actually see that we're dealing with two distinct sense-making loops. In the first loop, for parts 1 through 5, students will co-construct a gotta have it checklist, and in the second loop, which covers parts 6 through 10, the focus will be on our driving question board and completing a mid-unit formal transfer task. During the first sense-making loop, students are synthesizing evidence from past investigations leading up to Lesson 8 in order to co-construct a gotta have it checklist that will be used to revise their models to explain what causes lightning. They figure out that lightning is caused by changes in charges from a matter perspective and from attractive forces from a forces perspective. However, as they finish their individual model revisions, there should start to be a healthy level of uncertainty to naturally begin to emerge. They should realize that they cannot explain the thunder or the light that they see, leading them to wonder how energy connects these forces. And we'll revisit these key instructional strategies for this loop in our key moments and tips and tricks sections of this video. For the second loop, the class takes stock of our driving question board and completes a formal mid-unit transfer task. Students figure out how to apply atomic models to Coulomb's law and to predict and describe electrostatic forces between completely new objects. We will again dive deeper into the transfer task process and options in our key moments and tips and tricks sections. And by the end of this lesson, the class lands on two core conceptual takeaways. First, from a matter perspective, lightning is caused by changes in charges within a cloud. Second, from a forces perspective, it's caused by the attractive forces between the cloud and the ground based on Coulomb's law. However, the real success here is that they also figure out what they don't know, specifically how energy connects these forces to cause light and thunder. Now I want to pivot and highlight the specific constructually significant moments where the most meaningful student sense-making opportunities happen. Before we get to part 4, students began by working in pairs with various partners to compare their individual lists of modeling ingredients they generated in their science notebooks. Once those initial partner discussions wrapped up, the class gathers into a scientist circle with their notebooks as we prepare to negotiate a master class list. During this whole class consensus discussion, where students call out essential components and processes they believe are required to explain lightning, I or another student record their ideas on a board or chart paper. I consider this moment instructionally significant because the class converges on the must-have mechanisms from both a matter and a forces perspective without having everyone draw a single uniform classroom model. It allows the room to build common ground on core concepts where we figured out during the first 8 lessons. What I watch for in student thinking is how they advocate for their ideas, using evidence from their notes, ensuring they are identifying air as an insulator and recognizing the charge buildup in the cloud. A common sticking point is that students might want to list everything they can think of. And so what I would suggest a facilitation move is asking the class if each idea is truly required to explain lightning, or if maybe it's a nice to have and something they could include in the revision, but not required. In part 5, students return to their desks for quiet individual work. If you look over their shoulders, you'll see them redrawing their original diagrams from lesson 1, adding subatomic charge symbols and force arrows. This is a genuine shift in thinking because they are interacting in the micro scale of particles from lesson 5 with the macro scale of forces from lesson 7. I found this is where students realize the ground isn't a passive observer. It actually reacts to the cloud through polarization. During part 8, the classroom is a quiet room where students are independently analyzing a brand new phenomenon. This assessment serves as a formal window into how well students can transfer mathematical and pattern thinking to systems outside of the lightning context. I watch for whether they can apply Coulomb's law to predict electrostatic forces on a different scale. Part 10, the moment caps off at the end of the lesson. You'll see students looking up at the matter energy forces poster, realizing that while they have accounted for the M and the F in the poster, the E is completely blank. This is highly significant because it exposes a major gap in our understanding. What I watch for is their natural curiosity about the light, heat, and thunder, which beautifully motivates the high energy investigations for the second half of our unit. So to navigate out of this lesson, I frame our transition by celebrating how much of the lightning mystery we've actually solved using matter and forces, but we leave the students hanging on a major narrative hook. They are wondering, if we have matter and forces, how does that create so much light and sound? This sets up lesson 10, where we leave the micro scale behind to analyze data and use computational models to see how energy is stored in electric fields. Here are some secrets from my classroom and some logistical suggestions to help lesson 9 run smoothly. When building the Gotta Have It checklist, I frame my role not as the person with the answers, but as the facilitator helping the class map out where our ideas overlap and where we still have healthy disagreement. To keep the energy high and make this synthesis feel like a collaborative puzzle rather than a lecture, I like to use the pass the marker strategy where students physically hand off a marker to a peer to add the next piece of evidence on the board. We can also inject some fun by running a 60-second lightning round bracket, pitting competing ideas or representations against each other to see which one the class feels has the strongest evidence to support it. As we evaluate these ideas, we realize the strength of our final model depends on our collective input. Though I always remind the room that students are welcome to keep unique items on their personal lists if they can back them with evidence. OpenSciEd provides two distinct versions of the transfer task. The standard static interactions assessment, which is the one I choose to use for my formal assessment in the classroom, and the N95 transfer task. I love this feature because it grants us genuine instructional flexibility. You could use one version as a low-stakes ungraded practice activity, a formal pretest, or reserve a version for a formal reassessment opportunity before entering a final grade. Personally, I like the idea of using one version as a pre-assessment activity, and my preference would be to use the N95 assessment for this purpose because I think it's interesting and the static assessment feels more accessible and scaffolded to have students engage in a more high-stakes, independent grade. It's important to note that on that static assessments, questions 1A and 1B do require students to draw models showing the location and charge of subatomic structures. If you walk around, you might notice some kids getting stuck staring at their pages and struggling to remember where protons or electrons live. This is significant because a memory block shouldn't penalize their conceptual logic. I watch for this sticking point and have them pull out their physical paperclip models from lesson 5. Physically labeling the paperclips does tend to unblock their thinking before they begin to draw and gives them a tangible way to engage with the material. It's worth noting that no new vocabulary words are introduced or earned in Lesson 9. Our focus is entirely on synthesizing the academic language we co-constructed in prior lessons, like polarization and Coulomb's law. But because of this, you don't need to save any time. You don't need to save any time at the end of the class period for personal glossary entries. We've officially wrapped up our walkthrough through Lesson 9. Next time in Lesson 10, we are going to explore how energy is stored in electric fields across miles of air. Thank you so much for walking through this lesson planning session with me. I hope these practical facilitation strategies bring a ton of collaborative breakthroughs and great energy to your classroom. Good luck. You've got this.